Welcome to the third of what is a 3-episode podcast series on this year's book for Visitation Parish, Binding Us Together, a memoir written by Alvin Brooks. This is season 4 of our parish podcast, Viz on Main. Today's unedited episode will focus on St. Monica's Parish, the initiatives its parishioners have undertaken to keep it thriving and relevant to its community, and on some of the connections being made between St. Monica's and Visitation parishes. Joining me today is Ramonda Doakes, who is the chair of the Domestic Violence Subcommittee of the Social Justice Initiative of the Knights of Peter Clavier and St. Monica's Director of Religious Education. I'm Lorraine Gordon, a member of the Visitation Faith Formation Team. Ramonda, welcome, and thank you for spending part of your morning with us. I know you have a very busy schedule. Some of the Visitation parishioners listening to this podcast episode might not be familiar with what a force you are, both as a person committed to her faith as well as to her community. Would you share with us how you became a Catholic, how that faith has informed your professional life, and how your involvement with St. Monica's has given you opportunities to work with fellow parishioner Alvin Brooks?
That's a mouthful. Okay. Well, I grew up, I don't like to write things. I grew up in a multi-religious home. They were all Christians now, but which is not uncommon in my community. My mother was diehard Baptist, and my father was a non-participating Catholic. So that meant that I was going to have to go to Catholic school. I was going to have to go to Mass. So in all truth, and I'll put some humor into it, my mother had no objection to me going to Mass, but as soon as I walked out the door back into my home, she would say, "Come along, now you've been throwing water and praying to statues, we need to go to church." So I had to go to church with her, and which was another wonderful experience for me. It was Paseo Baptist, and it was Reverend Daniel Arthur Holmes, its founder, and who was also my godfather, which is a very strange thing, and I'll explain that because I had been baptized as an orphan in Korea, and it was a Catholic mission. So I'd already been baptized Catholic, but my mother did have me baptized again by Reverend Holmes because she felt that Catholics sprinkled water and you needed to be dunked, so I got dunked. And that's how that came about. And I spent most of my childhood and teenage years going to Mass. Then we had to go to Mass every day, if you went to Catholic school. But going to Mass and then immediately transitioning and going to Paseo Baptist. So I had a lot of religion, I guess. It's probably why I was such a bad kid. But my mother, and I tell this story because it is of such importance to people to understand how the Black community, views Catholicism. My mother, of course, used the old phrase, we were a bunch of Papists, and I was like, what does that mean? And she'd tell me, well, you all worship that man in Rome. And I'm like, Mom, no, we don't do that. Well, I've heard that he doesn't make mistakes. And I said, no, it doesn't mean that either. And, oh, well, whatever. And that was kind of her response to it. But I lived almost across the street from Annunciation Parish and School, which later became Risen Christ. But, and I had a lot of friends that were there, but I went to Blessed Sacrament, which was 10 blocks away. And the priest there, my mother saw him and I think a nun or two, and they were carrying things. And there was a string of apartment buildings, maybe 3 or 4, across the street from us, but everything else was a single family. And they were taking things. And so she was being nosy, and she wanted to go find out, and she did. And she said, they give blankets out? And I said, yeah, Mama, we do it at Blessed Sacrament. And all of a sudden, she started visiting the church. I didn't say going to Mass. I said visiting the church. She was cooking meals, taking them over, and getting her friends to donate blankets, and then in the summer it was fans. So all of a sudden, she saw the church as a part of our community, whether she was Catholic or not, and whether we were throwing water and praying to statues or not. It changed her whole perception. Our entire perception changed because of it. And so now there was no fight about me going to Catholic school. She thought, well, that might not be a bad idea, you know. So it's without the presence of the church in our community, there's no connection. And then there was a belief system in our community that a Catholic school was better than a public school. So, and that we can talk on later because we no longer have the schools. But
how about your professional life?
Well, yes, I was a professional student. We all can say that. And it was like I couldn't find what I should do next. Should I teach? Should I remain an academic? Should I do this, become do that? And I think I tried them all. Teaching, social work, and then that led me to, at the University of Kansas, we had classes that we taught at the Federal Penitentiary in Leavenworth. And I got very involved in that. And matter of fact, I made a couple of lockdowns. And my husband at that time was like, no way, that you can't do this job. And that means if something happened at the prison, it's totally locked down. You can't leave. They can't come, no one can come in, and you're there until they handle the situation. But I loved it. I loved the prisoners. And I don't think that I looked at it as something ethereal or holy or what I couldn't understand, and I learned later academically and through research. A federal prison is usually filled with people who commit thinking crimes. That sounds a little bizarre, but it's a total different situation where a state facility will house what we think of as criminals, murderers, arson. Well, arson is a federal crime. But so you have a different prisoner is what you have. And I just couldn't believe that there were people here for 25 and 30 years for ridiculous things. And when I say ridiculous, I mean forgery is not ridiculous, but if you're forging passports so you can go to countries to teach, I don't know if you gained anything. That's, if you are, well, I just want to leave it at that, I think. Mm-hmm. It was just that the crime and the punishment was a strange thing to me in the federal system. But I learned better when I went to the state system and saw that it was horrific, absolutely horrific. Which scares me today because of the prisons that are run by private companies. But it made me do that, and it made me go back to school so I could become a social worker. And when I stopped doing that, I became a social worker. And because I felt that, and I think that's when it all started, when I saw the future in children, not in adults anymore.
So did the focus on community that your mother saw and was so admiring of, did that somehow eventually translate into you becoming a social worker?
Yes, that was a great impact there. But understand, I grew up in this extremely extended and tight family, and I'll explain that by saying every summer of my life, we had a very large home. And every summer of my life, there was a cousin or a person or something who came to live with us. And periodically, we had people live with us for years that were going to school or making some change and whatever. My mother and father believed that if they were family, your doors were open. They were supposed to come. We had to afford that. So I grew up with a sense of community and responsibility for the neighbor. As a kid, that was one of my jobs, to take food to those neighbors who were sick, or my next door neighbor who didn't get out, or something like that. My mother was on top of that, okay, and children especially. So that always was taught. Mm-hmm. When I didn't live at home, I would call home and find people living with my parents that I knew. isn't that strange? People I'd gone to college with or something. Oh yeah, your mom said I could stay here, so I found an apartment. And so, but I'd say between my mother and the church, because right after this period, I left the church. So, as a young woman, and I think that some of the other questions that we can discuss why.
What
that
about
happened.
your work? Do you work with Mr. Brooks?
Oh, my goodness! You know, I can't remember a time that I haven't known him.
Yeah.
I even had family members who worked for him when I was too young to be doing that, and then later, I actually worked for him, which I don't think you knew.
I didn't know.
Okay.
No.
I was his legislative aide in the city council.
Okay.
Okay. When he became the mayor pro tem, I actually worked for him. And I think who had I worked for before? Because I had worked for Councilman Backus before, Ken Backus, and he's a member here. But no, I actually worked for Mr. Brooks. And I want you to understand that if you work for Mr. Brooks, it doesn't end at 5 o'clock, doesn't begin at 8, and there's no such thing as 5 days a week. Mr. Brooks has talked me into looking for housing, money, beds, food, school, for people who have come to him. I mean, it's like he ran this emergency room for our community. And even though he was a council person, he still was very active and Move Up and all of that. And I just came to just adore him and to love his family and be so grateful to them because they've had to share him forever, you know. So no, I worked with Mr. Brooks and worked for Mr. Brooks, but I say that because you don't quit. You know, Mr. Brooks forgets I don't work for him. So, but he doesn't care. You will get to do more work. Yes.
Well, as Visitation in St. Monica's parishes plan and implement collaborative activities, it really would be helpful for Visitation parishioners to know a little bit more about St. Monica's and its history. Since you've been integrally involved with the parish, would you give us a brief history of St. Monica's, which is documented, I believe, as the first Catholic church founded for African Americans in Kansas City?
Okay. That's going to be hard, and I wrote all this down last night because I didn't want to leave out something, but it's very much too long. But it's kind of important that it was Bishop Sullivan, okay, 1909 or something of that nature. He actually observed that there were about 35,000 Catholics, black Catholics. And there was nothing that actually spoke to them. And understand in 1909, I mean, you had areas that had shanties and overcrowded communities. I mean, there was no such thing as public housing. And because of segregation, you had to live where you had to live. And that's one of the reasons that Kansas City is very unique in that we didn't have one black community. We had many scattered throughout the city, including Leeds, which is an area that Mr. Brooks grew up in. But you had area of Westport, you had one 54th Street, you had this area, which everyone speaks of, 12th Street, 18th and Vinewood. This was only one area. And, but at that time, Bishop Hogan did notice it. And he just had a belief that someone should do something about it. So Father Cyprian Sawyer is who was encouraged to start a mission. And he actually went through and canvassed the neighborhood. And they always say discovered several superstitions about Catholicism. But what he did, Ruth Lane, at that time, she identified about 30 Catholics that she knew, families. And he knew he needed money and just all of that to start a school. And what he did is he actually wrote a letter to St. Catherine Drexel, She wasn't a saint then. And he hadn't heard from her. And there's a reason why her name is St. Monica. So he prayed to St. Monica. He did his novenas to St. Monica. And he always felt that that was why she called him back, or she, wrote him back. And so he made a decision that I think when she came to Kansas City, they actually picked this site, 17th and Lydia, which is right here, this square. Right. I wish I had a picture of it, but this is the original building, by the way, the school. Now, just think, she gave him $8,000. That was enough to build a school and do all. Now we can't even, what would that buy today? And then Bishop Hogan personally gave $50 of his own money. And people laugh when I tell them that, and I go, no, $50 was a lot of money in 1909. And he wasn't wealthy. He was a priest, so that was his personal money. And that was to, I think, to show that there was the responsibility of the religious to support what they support. So I'll always like him for that, I really will. Now, I think who else gave, Corrigan Companies, I think he gave up $1,000 or $2,000. But, and then churches, other Catholic churches, they actually donated everything else we needed. The things we needed on the altar and all of that.
That sense of community, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have, it was hobbled together, but it worked. And so October 2nd, 1910 was when it was formally opened, and it was called St. Monica's Mission for Colored Catholics. And sometimes you read that phrase, and then you'll read, or as you do research, St. Catherine Drexel. Now, when I read information that comes from the Drexel Foundation, it'll say St. Monica's mission to Native and colored children, because that was her focus, Native children and colored children at that time. But what was really different is, so this building here, we actually didn't do Mass here. We did Mass at 19th and Harrison. So, and we had kids, I have friends that are still here at St. Monica that went to grade school here, and they had to walk up to 19th and Harrison to go to Mass, and you had to go to Mass every day, and then you walk back down here to go to school. That isn't really that close.
Right.
Okay, it isn't close. But what was it? The Catholic Club, they decided to help St. Monica here, and they made a pledge. And the great thing about them, and everybody keeps telling me this happened, so I laugh when I read it, they always say they were prompt with their payments. I'm like, whatever that means. But I understand that, because we raise money now, and we appreciate promptness and generosity. But it's still, we were still short. So Father Cyprian wrote another letter. Okay. And she sent another check for $3,000. So that's quite a bit of money in that time period. And this building cost $12,676.11 to build. And it's here. It's still here. Okay, it's still here. So the dedication was in 1913. And I know this is just history, but there's a reason why I want everyone to know this. Now, at this time, understand this church here, when it was built, it had two beautiful statues that were donated, and it was St. Iphigenia of Africa and St. Benedict the Moor. I have no idea where the St. Benedict the Moor statue is, but we still have the St. Iphigenia statue. And they were actually imported from Paris. It was an attorney here, W.T. Johnson. He paid for them and donated them to our church. And then in 1940, another great bishop of Kansas City, Bishop O'Hare, made a decision that we needed a high school. And the high school was on the second floor of this building. Okay. Because that used to be the church, too, when they would have Mass and couldn't go there. that building was built, so we now have a high school. And I've been fortunate enough to know they've passed, a lot of them, who actually went to high school here. Not just grade school, but high school. Because we forget, not only there was no Catholic high school for black Catholics. De La Salle is a military academy. People forget. It came along later, but we have lots of our parishioners who actually, the men, who actually went to De La Salle. So I know that changed at some point in time. But I think, what is it, 1944, I had to say, that was their first high school graduation. And a beloved, beloved priest here, Father Alvin D. You don't hear a lot about him, but he was very important to St. Monica. And he actually purchased, well, I shouldn't say he, but that property where that is built, which we call Ferguson Hall, that cost $50,000 to build. And the goal was to be debt-free. So that money was raised. And then Bishop Cody is who dedicated that church. So that became St. Joseph Church. Okay. St. Monica was the school. And then later, we all know what happened. The diocese went into consolidation. And the parishioners at Risen Christ joined the parishioners here at St. Monica, or St. Joseph at that time. And in 1995, the two parishes agreed to merge. I've always thought we didn't really have too much to say so about it, but we did merge. And our first Mass was 1995 in October, and our priest was Father Phil Egan. That's who was here then. So,
Is that when it became St. Monica's?
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now they were still, I think, at Risen Christ until they came here. But they gave us a very strange name, and I think it was called the New Community Catholic Church or something. But what I really like is that the parishioners did come together and talk. They did talk about what they were going to do and what, how this was going to work and on. And that's how the new church came about and was built. And then I think they decided to reach back into their history. So now the church is named St. Monica Catholic Church. So I would just like, sometimes I have a problem with it because I'd like it to be St. Monica of Africa Catholic Church. But I think that we have black and white Catholics that don't feel that's necessary. But then I'll go, well, there's St. Teresa of Avila. There's St. Bernadette of Lourdes. I mean, I don't get it, but it's okay with me.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a complicated, and
yes.
I'm glad that you gave us all those dates and the names of the bishops who were integral.
Oh, now I forgot. Now Bishop Bowe in 2001, he dedicated that facility. That's
Great.
Okay.
Well, moving on to the next question. You and Alvin Brooks belong to the Black Catholic Implementation Team, which Bishop John Sullivan established as his representative delegation to the National Black Catholic Congress in 1987.
Yes.
What was the mission of that team, and does the work of the National Black Catholic Congress continue to this day?
Yes. Yes to the Black Catholic Congress, which is incredible. Bishop Sullivan was trying to look into the future too. And by this time you had a lot of black Catholics. But he actually encouraged the creation of the BCIT. But this is how it happened. He brought the group together in a retreat setting, black Catholics, and they met. And he wanted to send a team from our diocese to the Black Catholic Congress, okay, which is a wonderful experience. And although it's a Black Catholic Congress, I would encourage you one time to go.
Is that held in D.C. or?
No, it's held in different places.
Different. I see. Okay.
And there is going to be a Congress, I believe, in 2022. It's usually every 5 years. It's like the Black Sisters Conference. I always go, someone, you need to go. It's just wonderful. But the team went, and what they learned, they brought back, which is a dangerous thing when you open a mind, isn't it? So when they returned and met again. And one of the things the Black Catholic Congress encouraged was this, that everyone go back to their home parishes, encourage their diocese to create an office in their diocese for Black Catholics, or to create Black Catholic implementation teams to get that process started. So that's kind of where the name came from the Congress itself.
I see.
Okay. And when they came back, that's exactly what happened. And it was wonderful because it was Deacon Green, and he has such a humble and soft nature. And he led that. And we were at the diocese with an office, and for some reason, you know, that didn't continue. So, but the BCIT is here and quite alive, and I am a member of it. And we've just kind of we're kind of floundering. We did some things like, you know, I can't go without saying we created this wonderful book, because I'm going to talk about it, and the diocese just has to. And I love Bishop Johnson, but he's just going to have to choke on this one. We had people who wanted to know, once we had the 5 holy Black Catholics, you know that now, they wanted to know, well, what is the process? How do you become a saint? I mean, and I could share with you what my grandson thought about saints, who is Catholic, and I just adore him too. I made a mistake and let him read Butler's Lives of the Saints. And he told me, under no circumstances did he ever want to be a saint. And he said, Nana, do you see what they do to them? And I was like, you know, I never thought about children becoming a saint as punishment, you know. And it never occurred to me that was, he said, they hang them, they cut them up, they do. He said, no. So, in a way, when this project was personal to me, because I wanted him to see that saints weren't all from the 3rd century or the 4th century, and being a martyr for the faith didn't make us Muslims, you know, because that's the first thing he told me, and that there were real people. So this encouraged me when Ken led the team, and we researched everyone, and then we decided we would add as many Black Catholic priests and deacons to this, so that people would know that we didn't just appear. And I'm going to say something about that in just a minute. The Black Catholics just didn't fall out the sky and appear. But how do I say? It was an incredible experience, and it was heartbreaking. I could find out anything I wanted about a Black saint that lived before 1900. Maybe I should say it like that. And I could go to Donnelly's and buy a holy card. I could do something like that. But when I started, other than St. Monica of Africa, I had a problem with the holy cards, and I kept ordering them. And I wrote a nice little letter, and I said, you know, why don't you just make some more? I said, because I just don't believe that St. Monica of Africa was a wizened, little dried up white lady in a nun's habit. I mean, first of all, she wasn't a nun. Two, she wasn't white. And, you know, why do you keep sending me these same ugly cards? So I made some, by the way. That's how I solved that for me and the kids. But no change has happened. That's still my only option.
Well, I think it's important for the audience to know that what you're referring to is, how many pages are in that booklet?
It's a little over 80 pages.
80 pages, and it lists,
Its
you
name.
know, Black Catholic saints and other notables.
Right.
And it was a project that you undertook, right, with the youth of
B-
the
and BCIT.
MBCIT. That's cool. That's cool.
So what happened is that we were fine with it, and we are, something that you may not know, is that the diocese has a Black and Indian fund, and I've never really understood where it came from, and one day I harassed them about everything else, but one day I'm going to find out exactly how that came about. I have a feeling that it's tied to the St. Catherine Drexel Foundation.
Okay.
Though.
Okay.
We were proud of this. We didn't do it in color because we saw that as something to do in the future. And we were told that we cannot distribute this book from a Catholic facility or parish because there's a problem with the notables. And we had two that we picked that fit our notable, and that, of course, was Malcolm X and President Barack Obama.
Okay.
And those were pointed out to us. So we made a decision that we weren't going to make any changes. The diocese didn't have to give us any money, and we weren't going to distribute it from the church.
Okay. So it became sort of an independent project then.
Yeah. I mean, just to be honest, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to move on to the next question. There are two law professors from the University of Notre Dame. They've authored a landmark study in a book called Lost Classroom, Lost Community, Catholic Schools' Importance in Urban America. So in this 2014 publication, their research documents that Catholic elementary and secondary high schools promote what they call social capital for their neighborhoods. They not only benefit the students academically, but the neighborhoods economically and socially. Consequently, then, the closures of these schools since the mid-1990s have coincided with a noticeably negative impact on the surrounding communities. Now, there are several factors, arguably, that have contributed to these closures: the movement away from the urban core to the suburbs, the dwindling of women religious who taught at these schools, the rising expense of replacing those nuns with lay faculty, to name three, for example.
Right.
What is your perspective on the closures or consolidations of urban Catholic schools in Kansas City, Missouri over the last few decades?
That's going to be a real harsh question for me because I have absolutely no understanding of it. One, because the life sometimes of a parish is tied to the school. So without a school, you don't have children. There's no one to feed into the church itself. And maybe different from other ethnic communities, a lot of our kids who went to Catholic school weren't Catholic, okay? Which is a problem for a lot of Catholics, by the way. But it's almost, I think about everyone I went to grade school with, I'd say, and you go all the way, you have them the next year and the next year. I don't know one that didn't become Catholic at some point in their life, okay? It's just, I know that Sister Joanne, I went to grade school with her, and her foundation in Catholic school, though she didn't become a nun until her 20s, late 20s. We talked when she made that decision, but that was the biggest impact for even her, Catholic school. If a Catholic school hadn't been in her neighborhood, would she have gone, whether she was Catholic or not? And we went to Blessed Sacrament, and I have to note that it did change because fair housing came, and the following year, I think the school was all Black, except for maybe one or two families who hadn't deserted the neighborhoods. The other is that I just firmly believe that our diocese, no particular human being, but the collective concept of what to do didn't include our community. New schools were built in suburban areas. maybe I can say it like this to make people really understand it. I have friends who are not Black, who are Catholic and raise their children in their community, and their kids walk to Mass and walk to school or go a very short distance. So they can't conceptualize that their school is all white because of a reason, or all Italian because of a reason, and the reason being is that it's tied to the parish and the neighborhood. Well, for Black Catholics, we have to, what is our saying here, St. Monica? A church alive is worth the drive. We have to find the school because it's no longer there. So I understand money, I understand the economics of it. On the side, I've been a great entrepreneur, so I do get it. But if there's anything that you should lose money on, it should be educating children. I mean, if you had to choose something that wasn't profitable, that's okay with me. I mean, it's just, I just don't get it. And what it comes out to look like is that we're back, we've walked backwards hundreds of years if we continue to do this. Busing and my community we don't like that. It didn't work. It's unfair. It's absolutely absurd. So now I'm being offered by my church, my faith, that you can go to the new $4 million school, but we're going to bus you. Nah, I'm not going to do that. It was a hard decision for me with my grand. And although he's at Rockhurst, but he didn't really want to go there either. It's like, well, can I go to Pius? You know, and I'm like, well, that's just as far the other direction as,
Yeah,
that,
right.
you know, so,
Yeah.
but, so that, because everyone can't afford tuition, you know, I mean, let's just be real. Not that kind of tuition, I mean, you know, I just, it's, you know, I'm going to tell you what it feels like. I don't want you anymore. It's like a divorce. I mean, sometimes I feel that way, that the church is trying to divorce me or annul this relationship. I mean, since we don't believe in divorce. I mean, I sometimes think, is this an annulment? I mean, what is it? What are you doing? I'm not important anymore. All of a sudden, my music doesn't fit church canon law. I'm just overwhelmed with confusion about that.
Well, thank you for sharing that perspective. That's an important perspective to know and to hear. I want to move on to our last question. In your collaboration with Visitation parishioner Linda Hughes, who's an educator and also co-chair of Visitation's Racial Justice Committee, you and she have had success in bringing together young students from both parishes by focusing not only on a social gathering, but also on a service project.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you, Ramonda, what most inspires you about working with these young people in this collaborative initiative between our two parishes?
Now I get excited about that, okay. Children just have no boundaries and barriers to thinking and being, and I love it. I just love it. They get excited about new information, old information, because that's new to them too. And they're inquisitive no matter how they act like they don't care. They always want to know something. They always want to know something about the other person. They always want to know this or that. And as I told Linda, one of the things that we have to do is if we can teach our children, almost like the school here, citizens of the world, if we can teach our children that we're all human and that is our equality. You know, we talk about diversity and inclusion, but is that why children play with each other? No. So we have to start with them. We have to give their questions and their idea of what's going on. They need to be able to voice that. They need to be able to actually grow in becoming friends. And I'm not saying that the goal of every black, white, Hispanic, Asian person should be to be like someone else or to be assimilated. See, I don't even like those words. That's where we're wrong. That's where we've gone wrong. We keep saying America is a melting pot. I do not look like food. I don't want to be melted. It's just ridiculous. It's just, what is wrong? You know what? It's like weaving a tapestry or painting a picture. The most boring tapestry in the world, painting in the world, would be one that's all the same color and it has no deviation, and that couldn't be beautiful. That's the beauty of us not being alike, is that we're all different. And isn't that wonderful? I think it's such a struggle for me to be myself. I wouldn't want you to go through this crap. You know? Let me do it. I can handle it. But we need to, that's what makes us interesting to one another and helpful to one another, because we have different perspectives, we have different experiences, and the sharing of those experiences, because that, walk in someone else's shoes, I don't believe in that, because I don't think you can. But what I can do is I can accept your humanness. I can accept that you are me. And I'm going to give you a strange example. I know it seems like I'm getting off course, but not really. Did any of you experience Women of the Movement? Though I know the story backwards and forwards. And that was Emmett Till's mother. I think people think she was used and she was this and this happened, and maybe all that's true to someone or whatever perception you have. But she did what I think we must do. She wanted him viewed because she wanted people to know what had happened to her son. And I've had a lot of people say that was horrific, shouldn't have been done. What did she gain from it? And what she gained from it is this: if a mother of another complexion could not understand Mamie Till's life, could not understand racism, maybe felt it wasn't even true, what she could understand is the loss of her child.
Right. Right.
And that's kind of what's important to me, connecting with young people and young people connecting with each other. That same idea that we connect because of our humanity. And then I don't have to convince you that something's wrong if it's done to me. You can see it. People want to talk about racism. I want to talk about anti-racism. I want to know, what can we do to encourage that? What steps are there for that? And so that's why with children and young people, and even young adults, they need to immerse themselves not only in their faith, because the Klan is Christian, okay? And, or maybe they're not. Just like ISIS is not all, they're not Muslims. I mean, they're just a group. Mm-hmm. We have to figure out what distinguishes us or elevates us. It's almost like, what is the phrase? You can live in the world, but don't be of the world, don't be from it. And that's what I think faith is supposed to do for you. Feed you, guide you, lead you, and change your behavior toward other people. I mean, it's been a long coming. And I hate that phrase, God's still working with me. I think there are times I've seen him throw his hands up, but I believe that. I believe that it's something we need to do, and we have to be open to it. And we have to find things that are substantive, just real things, And with kids, real things work. They don't like, they may not want to read Bishop Gomez's letter and comment on it, but they don't have a problem with making sandwiches. for the
Sure.
homeless.
Yeah.
You see, they're like action steps. And although that might not teach them to never be homeless, what it will teach them is that we have not a we have a human responsibility to care for one another. And it's got to start somewhere. I took Dominion with me. He was 5, and Morning Glory told me he's too young. I said, he's not going to do anything to stand back here. And he passed out oranges. And finally, they gave in to me. You know why? Because he did this. Good morning, sir. I saw you last week. Would you like? He treated them like they were the most wonderful people in the world. And because I've not taught him anything else. And I told him about the lesson my father taught me about being young. My father never punished me or chastised me or anything, but he spanked me once because I laughed at a person that was, well, they were sitting on the corner and drunk or something. I don't know. But my father said, why would you do that? And I said, I'm sorry. And he could make you feel so bad, and that, just with words. And he said, let me tell you a secret. You're here at this spot. He's here at this spot. I'm here at this spot. He said, so all 3 of us are equal as far as God's concerned. And it shook me to my core, and I was only like 9 or 10 years old, which taught me in one example, no one's better than anyone else.
Well, I think it's amazing the way we've sort of come full circle. You began talking about your mother's respect for community and the way the Catholic Church can respond to that, and the way in which you see community being built among the younger generation. And they're hungry for it. I think
so.
they're very hungry for it. I really want to thank you for this. We've come to the conclusion of our 3rd episode relating to binding us together, and we hope that you've had the opportunity to listen to the preceding 2 episodes. I not only want to thank Ramonda Doakes for being with us today, but also the members of the Visitation Faith Formation team who have lent their support, especially Sandy McCrae. And a special thanks to Megan Brodowski, who has made sure that these 3 episodes are accessible on YouTube. The Faith Formation team would love your feedback on this and other episodes, so please feel